Hello, everyone. Since today's guest is an American who resides in Australia, I thought it would be appropriate, instead of an actual blooper with a sign, to give some examples of strine, which is Australian English or Australian English slang, so that if anyone does encounter Australians, either in this country or going there, that you can actually understand what they are saying. So, for example, and there are quite a lot of them, if anyone talks to you about a cozy, that is a swimming costume or a swimming suit. A dunny is dunny, D-U-N-N-Y, is an outside toilet. Good to know. If anyone talks to you about ear bashing, that means the person is nagging you. It's important to know that an esky is a portable cooler, a snag is a sausage, a sunny is sunglasses, and a tinny is the all-important can of beer. So with that, today's guest is Rachel Anne Carruthers. Rachel is the Global Platform Partnerships lead of a company called Canva, which many people know. And Canva is an easy-to-use drag and drop visual communications tool designed to empower anyone in the world to design anything from social media to objects such as mugs to websites. Before joining Canva in 2017, Rachel was originally responsible for leading out Canva's product and marketing localization and internationalization efforts. She worked to ensure that every user has a truly localized experience, whether on the web app, iOS, or Android platforms, while leading cross-functional globalization initiatives to support Canva's long-term international growth strategies. In March 2023, she shifted gears to focus on some of Canva's key platform partnerships, driving co-marketing opportunities and amplifying new product launches. So far, her favorite thing about her time at Canva has been the convergence of language and design and the anthropological aspect of how culture can affect users' design experiences and platform behaviors. Before moving to Sydney to pursue her master's degree in media, Rachel was working as senior localization project manager back home in Silicon Valley, servicing high-profile tech enterprise clients. Rachel is deeply passionate about language, food, and culture, and loves to travel wherever she can. And of course, being a good Californian, she loves being outdoors as well as working in animal foster care. Welcome, Rachel. Delighted that you are with us.
Thank you so much for having me, Philip.
Thank you. So perhaps we could start by your telling us what kind of country markets Canva is currently targeting.
Wow, yeah. So I guess maybe to start at the beginning, frankly, we've kind of, and I've said this before in other places, but we actually kind of took like a bit of a bottoms-up approach when it came to global growth and therefore localization, and that we rolled out our localization program to over 100 locales before we had a proper kind of market by market international growth strategy. And, as a result, now we're actually focusing on upwards of 20 or so kind of key markets at once in different areas that are at varying levels of maturity with regards to our growth program. But, I think like any other business, we're looking predominantly at North America, South America, a few key markets in Europe, a few key growth markets in Southeast Asia, Australia, of course, ANZ. But we're quite lucky to have adopters, Canva adopters from over 190 countries right now using our platform. So we really are a global platform.
That is marvelous. You mentioned Canva's international growth strategies. Can you give some examples of what they are?
Well, again, kind of starting from the bottom up, we've really started with the localization first growth strategy, which meant that we were focused in the earlier years in localizing Canva's platforms, be it the web app, the mobile app, both iOS and Android, things like our print offering, and subsequently our template library and everything in the product, localizing that into, a bunch of different languages, like I said, over 100, And that was kind of the first port of call. And now we're looking at developing marketing teams in several different regions. Marketing teams comprised of growth specialists, social media marketing specialists, performance marketing, digital marketing, that sort of thing. We even have creative teams in those markets to be able to help support, I should say, our creative marketing efforts as well. So there really isn't a one size fits all for the model that we're taking. We really kind of are looking at taking a tailored approach to what each market or region really needs for success after kind of laying that base layer of making the product available to anybody.
And when you mentioned sort of digital teams, or I guess design teams as well, I know certain countries prefer certain kinds of, let's just say, cartoon characters, for example, or certain design elements or certain colors, certain images that other countries don't. Do you get involved with that, perhaps offering different kinds of design elements, again, for certain regions that you would not offer elsewhere?
Yeah, so the team that I was formerly on, Global Services, which is the one looking after Canva's localization efforts, was I think more heavily involved in that earlier on. The team was responsible for localizing all of the template content within the library, but then also working with local designers to produce any market specific content, such as, like you mentioned, kind of, certain design elements or things like that. For example, looking at what our user needs might be in India, creating localized design elements for Diwali that they can use on social media graphics. Now, we have specialized teams within Canva who are actually doing the designing and producing these graphic design elements. So it wasn't our team, but where Global Services came in was to help kind of advise and consult as to what might be beneficial to have in certain markets. And over time, teams were spun up specifically to kind of service this need, and then they were able to do their own research as well.
When you mentioned India and the holiday Diwali, it reminds me that I don't know if it was McDonald's, but one of the hamburger companies entered India, of course. The Indians don't eat beef, or, well, strict Indians, strict Hindus don't eat beef. So they had to create other kinds of burgers, whether it was lamb burgers or soy burgers or something like that. And I presume it's the same kind of process when you are entering some of these markets where culturally, perhaps some of the elements that you would use in one place would not work in another.
That's exactly right. I mean, it's all about checking our kind of own biases at the door in terms of what we think other markets might not just expect, but want, an example of that would be Valentine's Day, actually, right? So if we are saying, okay, we want to make sure that we have Valentine's Day content within the library, we might have a lot of hearts, we might have different types of couples holding hands or kissing, and they might be either design elements or photos within templates themselves. In certain markets, namely ones that have large Muslim populations, modesty is much more important, and things like showing couples kissing, on a template might be considered inappropriate. So we need to make sure that we take a look at our own biases and what we consider appropriate or desirable, and put that kind of thought process into what we're elevating for users in certain markets.
And do you have teams on the ground in each country that will advise this, or do you do this internally through employees from those countries?
Oh, it's a bit of a mix. Yeah, it's a bit of a mix. We operate with both models, really. It just depends on the market.
Very interesting. Are your marketing strategies essentially the same worldwide, or do you alter them for specific countries or regions? Not the platform itself, but the marketing of the platform.
We definitely have a bit of a global blueprint, I would say, that we then tailor or tweak depending on what the needs of the markets are. So for example, if there are market specific channels or social media channels that are really important to target, then obviously we're going to tailor our marketing, our digital marketing content strategy to accommodate for that. But we generally start with a kind of a global blueprint, because you don't want to be reinventing the wheel every single time you
Right.
kind of enter a new market.
Exactly. You mentioned in your bio about how culture affects users' design experience and platform behavior, and you've touched on this to some extent, but can you elaborate on some ways that culture affects what you're doing?
Yeah, I mean, being in this role, I've learned so much about how different cultures relate to design and what the role of design is in their everyday life. I think it's a bit of an outdated example at this point, but I still find it so fascinating. About 5 years ago, um, WhatsApp actually went down. The platform went down and crashed in India, because in India it's quite common for people to send good morning messages via WhatsApp and good night messages via WhatsApp, and these are usually like GIFs or animated images that are quite heavy data wise. And so you have, a billion people sending a message at the same time over the same platform twice a day. And, turns out the server couldn't handle that, frankly, not shocking. And it's something like that you just I wouldn't have considered to be a thing, and until I had heard that story. But the point of that is we go, oh, this is very much a use case of design in people's lives, something small, something simple, but they're creating designs, they're accessing designs and sending it to each other as a way to stay in touch and communicate every day, twice a day. So, we made sure that we had a lot of kind of good morning and good night messages as well, within our template library available for Indian users, things like that.
It's wonderful. It reminds me of a separate story, but somewhat related. Since you're from California, you may know the company Jelly Belly. They make jelly
I
beans.
do, yes.
They are, I assume they are still headquartered near San Francisco, where our office is based. And years ago, since we are in the language translation business, we've been doing this for over 30 years, but in our first, maybe certainly the 10 years, probably our first 7 years, they came to us with a menu, just a brochure which had different pictures of jelly bean flavors. And the translations were not difficult. There were maybe 35 or so jelly bean flavors and different colors of jelly beans. And they wanted this translated for languages all around the world, including Hebrew and Danish. And I remember the Danish translation team came back to us to say, no self-respecting Dane would ever eat a popcorn flavored jelly bean. We cannot translate this. Uh, and the Israelis in Hebrew had some similar reaction of some flavored jelly bean that no Israelis would ever eat or something. So
They just need to translate it to butter, which I don't know if that would be much better, to be honest. But
so we just had to tell Jelly Belly that terribly sorry, but in Denmark, please, perhaps you should drop your popcorn flavored jelly bean.
right.
Um, what else can you tell me about how I guess Canva marketing is done in terms of targeting specific countries, perhaps with a different, it's the same platform, but are there other marketing issues or finance issues that arise that differ by country, for example?
I don't think there's anything terribly unusual for us that I think any kind of company would probably come across in terms of being able to calibrate spend across different markets for the ROI that you want to see. I think our I wouldn't say challenge, but our main focus is that we're kind of constantly calibrating our user growth. We measure our user growth through monthly active users, MAUs, versus our revenue growth. And in each case, we do a ton of organic growth efforts. We have many own channels as well, but obviously we have marketing budget to spend on both of these acquisition targets, and it's really about calibrating your marketing budget so that you're not, let's say, cannibalizing the free, I should say free, organic kind of growth that you might see in a market via digital marketing. You can spend so much, but there's always going to be a bit of an overlap, and you want to, and that kind of calibration is always going to shift as well, because there are different influences that or different factors that will influence, I think, user growth within a market that are also outside of our control, right? So it's constantly kind of tweaking and adjusting our budget and our spend in certain channels to make sure that we're spending wisely and efficiently.
What are some of your largest markets? I presume the US is the largest, if not among the largest, but what about, you mentioned Southeast Asia, for example, Indonesia? Is that a large market just because of the population size?
Yeah, so Indonesia is a big market for us. Brazil is as well. The Philippines and India are both climbing pretty quickly. So it's really the markets that you'd expect, frankly. The ones that are very online, the ones that are also heavy social media users, as we've obviously found that's a huge product market fit for us as well. We're looking more towards markets that are, how can I say this? Increasingly online. So there are certain areas of the world where digital connectivity is growing at exponentially faster rates than other places. I mean, India is one of those places, obviously. Certain countries in Africa, also the case. So yeah, we're looking to basically meet users where they already are via our product offering.
Very interesting. When change hats for a moment, actually, no, let me stay with Canva. Are you in China and Taiwan at the moment? I assume Taiwan, yes, but China also?
Yeah, we are. We have we have a few China teams actually. We've been in China for, I want to say, about 5 years, 5 or 6 years. And one of the reasons that we have a whole team in China is not just the localization requirements. Well, I suppose this is actually a localization requirement. We actually built our China product on an entirely different technology stack, or I should say entirely separate technology stack, because of the Great Firewall of China. So we actually needed to build the product to be housed, within China. Otherwise, the connectivity would have been horrendous for any users trying to access the tool from within China. So we kind of built an almost mirror kind of version of our product that we then again tailored for the China, mainland China audience. Again, things from content to product offerings, different types of connections in terms of what platforms users can share designs to, things like that. We are live in Taiwan and Hong Kong, but that is on the global Canva product.
And in China, does the government restrict certain images or certain ideas that you're not allowed to say?
That's a really good question. We haven't had any discussions with the government around that specifically. But I think that we are also, because we have a design team, based in China, we kind of know where the fault lines are, I suppose. And as a design company, we're not necessarily looking to populate the library with anything incredibly, what can I say? Controversial, or it's really about creating a platform that users can use to then express themselves, and make what they like. So we're just there to give the building blocks, really. So there hasn't been anything restrictive or anything like that.
Interesting. One of my past guests was talking about, in a different context, of course, about the concept of love in different countries, symbol of love in different countries, where in the Western world, a diamond ring, of course, is the symbol of love and engagement when a couple is coupling. But that is not the case in Asia, in East Asia, where in Japan, for example, Korea, China, the idea of giving a diamond to symbolize love is simply not part of the culture traditionally. And wondering if those kinds of issues arise also, where there may be certain, and you mentioned Diwali and you mentioned Valentine's Day, which is wonderful. Are there other cultural issues or icons or symbols that simply don't translate, that don't work across a global platform?
Oh, absolutely. You know, I remember when I first started, the issue of having, so it was quite a sensitive topic, obviously, but there were symbols in our library that look a lot like swastikas. Now, that is because
It's a symbol for
exactly.
Buddhism. Looks
They're highly religious, highly revered symbols for Buddhism. And around a lot of Indian holidays as well, we see those, you know, as part of really important religious design symbols. Now, you know, obviously it was raised to our attention. Somebody saw it as a swastika, which is very easy to do, and, you know, was appalled that we could have it in the library. And it's, you know, how do you have that discussion, right? Who's right, who's wrong there? It's a really difficult one, because on one hand, you know, we absolutely don't want to offend or hurt anybody, or we absolutely don't want to promote any hate-filled, you know, ideology, bigotry, racism, anything like that. I'm Jewish, you know, I saw this and I was looking at like, I'm just not sure how to tackle this one. I'm also a student of Asian religious art, so I was very conflicted. And you know, at the same time, you don't want to remove something that's a highly revered and highly relevant and has long, you know, been around long before, you know, a Nazi party was, right? So how do you tackle something like that? And it's fortunately we have the ability to kind of, for the lack of better terms, kind of turn on and turn off certain content types in different parts of the world. So that has made challenges like that easier to navigate, but it's still going to be a discussion point. And I think it should. I mean, this is now much larger than Canva, right? It's how do we look at iconography and who owns iconography and who owns the story of iconography. But stuff like that is what I find, you know, incredibly fascinating. But again, you know, our top priority is really making sure that users are both represented and feel safe and seen while using our product. So being able to hide or show or elevate certain content on a kind of language by language basis definitely helps that.
I presume you could have separate libraries, like one for Buddhism, one for Hinduism, one for Christianity, and so forth.
I mean, we could, but then at the same time, who are we to say, okay, you're in this country, you only get that library. Okay, you're in this country, you only get that library, right?
Oh,
So in America, which library would we show? We'd want to be showing all of them, right? Because all of these types of people live in
yeah.
markets across the world. So that's kind of, I guess, what I mean when I say that I find the anthropological side of all of this quite interesting. You know, there's very often not a strictly right or wrong answer, but I think when it comes to our product, there are obviously clearly right things to do and wrong things to do in terms of how our users feel when they use our product.
Absolutely. Since you are in Australia and since you are from the United States as a good Californian, um, how do the business methods differ from between the two countries, the United States and Australia, or perhaps interactions with people or expectations that people may have? How can you describe those?
I would say that it's more of an attitude difference between Australians in business and Americans in business. So Australians are much more, again, I should also say with a grain of salt, all of these are sweeping generalizations as well. But generally speaking, Australians have a much more relaxed nature about them than Americans do. I don't think that comes as big news to anybody, right? But that trickles down kind of in the day-to-day way of doing business in terms of how people communicate, the urgency in which they communicate, timeframes in which people expect to get things done.
Mm.
It's kind of this classic Americans, what is it? Americans live to work, and
Right.
so much of the rest of the world works to live. And I think that Australia falls into that category much more. So I think the biggest, most obvious tangible example is just work-life balance. That's what I found. So firstly, the amount of holiday that we have, in Australia, having 4 weeks off is the standard, whereas in America it's 2 weeks. And just, the approach to self-care and things like, if you're not feeling well, it's okay to take a sick day, you're not like that guy who's slacking off, because people get sick. Whereas in America, I remember, I felt like I couldn't even take my 2 week holiday. You just felt bad, you didn't want to be the person who was gone, and you didn't want to put your work onto other people. And so there's a bit of that in terms of how that trickles down into business, I think. Coming from specifically San Francisco and Silicon Valley and working in tech, historically for so long, it's been the epicenter of the tech world. And so there's this kind of attitude of anything relevant, anything good, anything successful is going to be coming out of Silicon Valley. And, that's changing tremendously, not just from within Australia, but especially in the ANZ region. Markets like Singapore, are growing massively. And I think that's really amazing. I think that it's helping to kind of shift the cultural narrative in terms of what it means to be successful in the tech world. I love when people think that we're an American company, and I get to go, no, we're Australian, very much Australian. I think I'm a bit of a red herring as well. If they're speaking to me and they know I'm from San Francisco, then it's like, oh, okay, well then, yeah, the company's from San Francisco. So it's really, to be very blunt, I think with American business, there's this very America-centric way of looking at things, looking at the world, and thinking everything good is right here. It's just not the case. And I think the rest of the world knows that.
More than
That
Americans
would be the
do.
main difference.
I assume the Australian business life is very casual and very informal. So most people, I assume, are addressed by their first names, and that is true in the United States as well. Much less so in Europe, where you have titles with people and the equivalent of Mr. or Ms. or Mrs. so forth.
Sure.
In Australia, is there more of an open door policy where you can go into the boss's office at any time and just give ideas, or is it more formal, like make appointments or schedule something in advance to see someone?
I think it definitely depends on the sector that you're in, right? So
Okay,
if
yeah,
you were in the banking sector, for example, right, yeah, things would be much more formal. But famously, the tech sector, very informal, Australia even more so. I can speak for Canva, in terms of kind of what our policies are. And the top level answer is, yeah, there's absolutely an open door policy. I mean, it's obviously much more difficult to get time into, Mel or Cliff or Cam's calendar these days than it was for me in, let's say, 2017, which is totally understandable. They're very busy people, but there is absolutely an open door policy in terms of, if anybody has thoughts or feelings or feedback on what they want to see, gosh, on anything within the product, within the company culture, within our policies and procedures, really anything, there are a myriad of mechanisms that we can kind of loop into, and they get addressed. They actually get addressed. It means a lot to our founders, that we are very much an organization kind of run company, and everybody's values are incredibly important. And it's something that I'm really proud that we've been able to maintain that culture, of openness and feedback, throughout all of our tremendous growth over the last several years. It's something that's it's a tricky balance, right, to try to maintain. But it's something that's really important to the way that we run our company.
Absolutely. You've mentioned about Silicon Valley and worked in Silicon Valley as a senior localization project manager. What kinds of localization challenges or difficulties did you encounter, and for which kind of companies?
Oh, which kinds of companies? Well, I was working again mostly in the tech sector when I was working for Relocalize. And the types of challenges we came across, I would say, were more they were less on like kind of a technical localization sort of side and more in like processes and ways of working, because all of the clients we had obviously had different ways of working. And we had one client that even despite being a really large organization, well, maybe because they were a really large organization, still are, work a lot in silos. And so you might have one of our localization teams, doing work for this specific product function over here, and another one of our localization teams kind of working with that product function over there. And, in theory, there's a lot that you can kind of co-leverage in terms of like translation memories, style guides, processes, all these, but because the client silos did, A and B didn't talk to each other, and very intentionally, that kind of made our work a bit more difficult. And, at the end of the day, we're like, you could actually be leveraging a lot more savings and efficiencies here, which is kind of counterintuitive, of course, to the way that we want to run, because we wanted to do our best job and be the best, most efficient project managers and program managers that we could be. So that was a little bit of a struggle sometimes, but at the end of the day, you're working for your client, and it's got to be what works for them. So we would make things work. In terms of technical localization challenges, though, there weren't too many. I think maybe some of the most challenging content sometimes was working for an online travel booking company. And if there were, say, things that would happen, like a volcano would go off, in a certain part of the world, that's going to stop traffic, air traffic, that's going to stop flights and all of these things. And so they need to send out comms really urgently to a lot of their users. And so it'd be getting things done really, really quickly. I mean, anybody who's worked in the localization industry can tell you about a number of tight turnaround projects they've had, I am sure. But we're talking about, we need this in 2 hours now because it has to go live within 3 hours because, this flight is going to leave. So making sure that we had, processes set up for things like that was a challenge.
Very interesting. Yeah.
Mm.
It reminds me of many years ago, again, around year 2 or 3, perhaps, of our own company, we got a call from Apple Computer asking, saying that they want to have a press conference, and they need Steve Jobs, during his first incarnation at Apple, was going to give a press conference, and they needed his remarks translated into 5 languages within 1 hour so that it could be disseminated around the world to the international media. Fortunately, they gave us the lead time so that we could, set up the translation teams and have everything ready. This was way before translation memories and way before even, I think, the internet very much. So anyway,
Wow.
we did it, and it was
Nerve-wracking.
fun. Yes. Well, this is why I'm gray, but that's okay. On a personal note, you say that you love animal foster care, and was wondering what kind of animals you fostered both in California and then separately in Australia.
Yeah, so predominantly cats and kittens, really. I've adopted a few animals back in California, but I've mostly been fostering here in Australia and working with a no-kill organization called Maggie's Rescue that either finds cat colonies in different parts of Sydney or works with shelters so that they can leverage their foster network to make sure that cats aren't put down or anything like that. So I've had 2 or 3 batches of kittens here over the last year, which has been Pretty cute. It's exciting. It's a good solution for someone like me who loves having pets, but then also I'm on the move a bit as well. So less of a commitment. But then I also get to feel, like I'm helping as well and giving the kittens a chance at life that they may not have had before. So yeah, I love it. It's great. I love animals.
So no fostering of koalas or wallabies?
Oh, Nate, if that was allowed, I'm sure people would. There are a few different wildlife sanctuaries around. I mean, there are many around Australia, obviously, and more when you get into the more rural parts of the country. But there are a few places not terribly far from here where they're kind of like wildlife sanctuaries that people can go visit, but also a few people who like around south of here near just past Bateman's Bay, which I'm sure everybody knows where that is. So 4.5 hours south, in an area called Mogo, a woman running, I guess it would be a sanctuary for kangaroos. I don't think she has any koalas. She's got some wallabies. She's got maybe some wombats as well, and it's mostly that she has the land and that she's in touch with animal rescue and care, because wombats and kangaroos specifically, I mean, they're kind of like our deer and
Right.
rabbits, you drive down the highway, you see them, sort of thing. So she doesn't even have to really go get them and bring them in, although she does. She'll take in some that have been injured, like when we had the really devastating fires of 2019 going into 2020, mass devastation, which was just horrendous to see. There were a lot of shelters like hers and different sanctuaries taking in a lot of animals to help them recover and kind of nurse them back to health, which is amazing to see. So maybe one day that's a future path for me as well. Look, kangaroos are significantly more work than kittens, I think.
Yes, from kittens to kangaroos, but
I don't know if I have the stomach for that, really.
is there anything else you'd like to add before we close?
No, I mean, I really appreciate getting the time to chat to you today. It's always fun to kind of dig into the little niggly bits and challenges of the international, marketing and international business world. So thank you for giving me the time.
Thank you, Rachel. It's a pleasure speaking with you, and I hope all of our viewers and listeners will join us next week for another edition of Global Gurus and their stories of international business. Thank you.
Thank you.